Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's wonderful to see people here tonight. It's wonderful to see so many of you at home last week at the Oneg, a little more alive, and it's great to at least sort of see toward you in this one direction and hope to get to connect more soon. Maimonides may imply that our sleep is the longest prayer that we have every single day, or maybe throughout the year, at least if we're sleeping enough. But I think undoubtedly for those of us who are connected to synagogue experiences, the season of Yamim Noraim, of high holidays, is a time that we associate a lot with prayer. A lot of prayer. Sometimes longer services than we're used to, maybe even on Yom Kippur, committing ourselves to just being in one place pretty much all day, with prayers that go on and on and on. Indeed, the most famous, perhaps, piyut, liturgical poem of the season of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, when the Tana Tokef talks about teshuvah, turning around, tefillah, prayer itself, and tzedakah, righteous giving, as three ways of averting a negative decree against us. Last week I talked a little bit about teshuvah, and tonight I thought I would just take a few minutes to talk about tefillah. And there's certainly going to be a lot of talk about tzedakah. And there already has been, and we appreciate all of your support of the Open Door campaign and all it takes to make sure that high holidays are available for not only the CBST immediate community, but all of our friends that join us in this season. One of the frameworks of the prayer book is the framework of creation, revelation, and redemption. So to make those words shorter, well, maybe not shorter, the beginning of it all and the world that we have, I would say revelation is Torah. It's how we're supposed to behave in the world, how we relate to each other, how we love, how we connect, what we're responsible for. And redemption is about possibility. Not simply the world and what we're told to do to operate in the world, but what might happen if we take those things and get them together exactly right, which is not necessarily an easy task. So I want to say just a word about the background of our prayer book. This may not be new for many of you, but also to connect it to one of the prayers that brings us through this season. So when we think about the prayer book itself, there are a lot of ways in which this cycle of creation, revelation, and redemption comes up. One of the most obvious ways is in the daily prayers around the Shema. In the morning, we say, Baruch Yotzer Or V'Orei Choshech, blessed is God who creates light and darkness. We recognize the morning light before we even get closer to the Shema. And in the evening, as Cantor just chanted, Hama'ariv Aravim, blessed is God who brings upon the evening, who evens the evening, I think as Rabbi Sean Zevitt once said, or wrote a song about. And before we get to the Shema, morning and evening, we have a second prayer, a prayer about love. Ahavat Olam, an eternal love, Ahava Rabbah, a great love. The love that's based in Torah, this idea that God's teaching is here to show us how we are to operate in the world. Kihem chayenu ve'orech yamenu. These words are our lives. These words are the length of our days. We shall meditate upon them day and night. And indeed, even saying the Shema, perhaps every day, night and day, is one of the ways in which we meditate on the words of Torah, since the Shema comes out of Torah itself. So we approach the Shema by recognizing the morning or recognizing the evening, connecting ourselves to the time of day, literally. And then we approach the Shema by saying, wow, we have these tools, the tools to teach us to love ourselves, to love each other, to love God. And when we finish the Shema, we move toward this blessing whose most familiar words are, Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai. Who is like you among the deities, O God? We quote again from the Torah this incredible song of redemption, maybe one of the oldest parts of the Torah itself, and thank God for redeeming Israel in that moment. And I think in doing so, we also both remember that story, we remember the Exodus, and perhaps we anticipate the possibility that for anyone who is not yet free, there is still the possibility of becoming free. We have not taken all those tools of creation and taken them, those facts of creation, right, the world as we have it, and mapped them together with everything we know from Torah to bring about redemption. The pattern repeats. The pattern repeats on Shabbat. Because if you consider the verses, even Levlecha Dodi, we hearken back quite literally to the story of creation. We're told that Shabbat is Sof Ma'aseh B'machshavat Chila, the last thing that God made, but the very first that God had in mind. Now that's about creation, but it's probably also a reminder for how we are to operate in the world, because if Shabbat was the first thing that God had in mind, that means that we weren't the first thing that God had in mind. That somehow there's something bigger, right, even than humanity. So lest we think that we're the pinnacle of creation on that sixth day, there's something afterward. Kiddush, which we'll hear in a little while tonight, also talks about Shabbat as Zecher L'Maaseh Bereshit, as a reminder of the work of creation. So besides the prayers around the Shema themselves that repeat morning and evening, the evening service, this service around Shabbat, tends to focus on the Shabbat of creation, the mythic seventh day where God rests, where God stops, and years later we're told explicitly that we're supposed to rest too. Shabbat in the morning tends to be about revelation. Shabbat in the morning is an opportunity to be standing at Mount Sinai once again, to hear the Torah read, word by word, literally. We hear teaching, we talk about the teaching. We are, even in the gradual process of how we relate to the Torah scroll and the Ark and bring it out, there's a sense that revelation happens gently, step by step. When we read the story in the Torah about how the Torah itself was revealed, there's a whole process even of preparation for that. And Shabbat in the afternoon, the prayers that we don't get to do together as often here in this community, but Mincha, before Shabbat goes out, those prayers tend to be a bit more about redemption. Ata echad, you are one. V'shimcha echad, and your name is one. And who is like you in the earth? No. Usually we say, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai echad, God is one. But we also, at the end of Aleinu, tonight, will say, one day, Yeh Adonai echad u'shmo echad. God will be one and God's name is one. So we live with this constant tension that on the one hand, God is one, but on the other hand, the more we do the right things, the more we take the world around us as it's created and take the tools that we have in Torah and put them together, the more God can become even more one, if you will. The more that we create more unity in the world, the more that we're all connected more deeply. The afternoon Shabbat prayers go on to talk about our patriarchs, matriarchs. Abraham will rejoice. Isaac will cry out in song. in the future tense. Future tense for people who have lived thousands of years ago in our tradition. But somehow that's the imagery of a messianic era, a time, and I think maybe that's also why Shabbat is sometimes called like, as if it were the world to come, a little taste of that. So I want to say one more word, which means one more subject, section of my talk about prayer, because this part of tefillah is something that I think many of us are familiar with throughout the high holiday season. If you're not familiar with it and you spend some more time at CBSD, you will get familiar with it, because the 27th Psalm, the 27th chapter of the book of Psalms, is a prayer that takes many communities through this entire season of the holidays. From the beginning of the month of Elul, not only all the way through Yom Kippur, those 40 days, but even through Sukkot. Depending on your custom, and if you say it morning and evening, it could be 100 times in all, something like that. And this psalm, as I've understood it, can be connected to the holidays because it actually starts, first of all, with words of creation themselves. LeDavid Adonai Ori. By the way, if you're a visual person and want to see it on page 188, feel free. Adonai Ori, God is my light. It starts with the image of creation. And we associate Rosh Hashanah with those 7 days of creation. In fact, if you think backwards and follow the tradition that the first day of Rosh Hashanah is the day when humanity is created, then we have this whole week of creation that leads into Rosh Hashanah. God is my light. This is how it all begins. We go right into this season, hearkening to this image of creation. Hayom Harat Olam, Cantor will sing, this is the day the world was conceived, 3 times each morning of Rosh Hashanah, each Musaf service of Rosh Hashanah. Sometimes I think this imagery of Adonai as my light is the part of us that needs to go out and connect in the world. The part of me that even when I've had a long week and kind of want to hide under a rock, that never happens, but sometimes. Happens a lot. That draws us to say, yeah, there's light out there. There's something else besides just me. And the psalm continues, Achat sha'alti me'et Adonai. One thing I ask from God, this is what I desire. Shivti b'veit Adonai, kol yimei chayai, that I dwell in the house of Adonai all my days. Lachazot b'noam Adonai, to perceive the pleasantness of God, uvaker b'heichalo, and to visit in God's sanctuary, in God's holy place. It's an ancient word, heichal, that I think comes up in lots of Semitic languages and goes all the way back to Sumerian or Akkadian, that sort of is on the cusp of palace and sanctuary. What does it mean to visit in God's holy place? Is that a second step once we've gone out into the light to then have this moment of revelation? Or is it possible that this moment can actually happen when we're alone too? On those days when we do want to hide under a rock, not walk out the door, that we can still somehow be in God's holy place, even alone with ourselves, alone with God. Perhaps one way or the other, this part of the psalm is talking about Yom Kippur, the idea of having just a tiny glimpse of God, imagining the high priest going into the Holy of Holies just once a year, and imagining being connected to that and what that could mean for us in terms of a personal experience of revelation, as if we were at Mount Sinai, as if we were really in the temple courtyard, hearing God's name said in all of its amazing mystery once a year. Remember, Yom Kippur, as Rabbi Klein has talked about from this bima for years, is also the day we associate with God's forgiveness, with the giving of the second tablets of the Ten Commandments. So there's also a really direct connection to Mount Sinai, take 2, on Yom Kippur as well. The third image in Psalm 27 is the image of a sukkah. Ki itzpaneni b'sukkah b'yom ra'ah. I will be sheltered in your dwelling, in your sukkah, God, even when times are hard. And on the one hand, this seems like an image of protection, but most Sukkot I've been in have a certain fragility to them, and that's part of the tradition, that it's not supposed to be a permanent dwelling. So while maybe literally speaking, the psalm brings us from creation, from that image of light, the going out, to revelation, to that moment of just connection, to now the third holiday of the season, to Sukkot. Maybe the pathway to revelation, maybe the pathway to redemption isn't simply feeling protected. It's actually being able to live in that place where we feel somewhat protected, but also somewhat vulnerable at the same time. Protected and vulnerable at once. It's not an easy place to live with, because sometimes certainty is really, really easy, and the gray areas can be hard. But this is also a place of growth, a place where teshuvah can happen, where growth can happen, where possibility can happen, where prayer can both bring us to be open to that place, and also when we're in that place, prayer can help ground us. I had a Methodist minister colleague years ago who said, sometimes people want to be so certain about things that they raise certainty to almost a form of idolatry. And so I think that what the image of the sukkah can teach us is that the pathway to redemption is also one that's paved with being in gray areas, both feeling senses of protection and going out from that comfort zone at the same time. There's even a sort of obscure passage in some prayer books that people say when they take their sukkah down at the end of the holiday that says something along the lines of, just as we were privileged to dwell in this sukkah, one day we'll dwell in a sukkah, something like made of Leviathan, the sea beast, some mythic sea beast, and the kind of this image of messianic days that somehow there'll be this great sukkah in the world in general. And that imagery comes up even in the prayers for that holiday. So this is the journey. It's a journey that can happen day after day in our prayers. It's a journey that can happen Shabbat after Shabbat as we recognize our places in creation, recognize that we have the tools, and now we have to use them. And it's a journey that, for those of us who really like a deadline, we can really dig into during this period as we carry ourselves into a season of new light, of remembrance of creation, of the possibility of the most intense connections through prayer, through the vulnerability of the Yom Kippur experience, through connection to community, and then through experiencing the sheer joy of the holidays like Sukkot and Simchat Torah, even while recognizing that there's always this sense of you never really know what tomorrow will bring, and we can feel protected all at once. So I hope we get to feel all the feels, have a lot of reflections, and look forward to each of us both getting that rest and doing the work of leaving this world a little better than we found it in a few weeks from now, and continuing to do our roles in bringing about the Messianic age. Shabbat Shalom.